You notice the smell before you notice the city. It hangs in the air of Paris even before the sun begins to rise, a strange sweetness mixed with damp earth, smoke, and something heavier that settles quietly at the back of your throat. At first you might think it is the river, or yesterday's fish left too long in the market stalls. But as you breathe again, slower this time, you realize the truth is far less comforting. The smell comes from the dead. In the year 1400, the heart of Paris beats beside one of the most crowded cemeteries in Europe. Beneath a busy marketplace called the Cemetery of the Innocents lie layer upon layer of graves, bodies buried so tightly that the soil itself struggles to contain them. When new graves are dug, bones often rise to the surface. Sometimes entire skulls appear among the dirt like pale stones. And still, the market opens every morning. Bread is sold only a few steps from the graves. Butchers hang fresh meat beneath wooden awnings. Children weave between stalls while merchants shout prices into the morning air. Life continues as if the earth beneath the city were not slowly filling with the remains of generations. It is a strange thing to imagine, and yet for the people of Paris this is simply the world as it is. Morning begins quietly inside a narrow timber house along a cramped street near the market. The room is small and low, its ceiling darkened by years of smoke from a hearth that rarely cools. Straw covers the floor to absorb spills and dirt. Though the straw itself has long since taken on the smell of old wine, damp boots, and the faint ammonia of waste, you wake beneath coarse wool blankets that itch against your skin. The mattress is a sack filled with straw and feathers that rustles loudly whenever you shift your weight. Outside, somewhere beyond the wooden shutters, a cart rattles over uneven stones. A rooster calls from a courtyard nearby. Then another sound follows, a dull thud of metal against wood as a merchant opens the heavy shutters of his shop. Paris is waking. You dress quickly in a linen shirt and a wool tunic that still carries yesterday's sweat. Clothing is rarely washed as often as one might hope. Water must be carried by hand from public fountains, and the city is large. Most people simply air their garments by the fire and trust that smoke will keep them tolerable for another day. The door opens onto a street barely wide enough for two carts to pass. Tall timber houses lean inward from both sides, as if whispering across the narrow gap above your head. Their upper floors stretch outward over the street, blocking much of the pale morning sky. Rainwater drips slowly from wooden beams blackened by decades of soot. The ground below is soft. What looks like mud is rarely just mud. Horses pass through here daily, leaving manure that mixes with discarded scraps from kitchens and workshops. Fish guts from the market, rotten vegetables, ash from hearths, and occasionally the contents of chamber pots emptied from upper windows during the night. Your boots sink slightly with every step. A woman walks past carrying two heavy wooden buckets suspended from a pole across her shoulders. Water must be collected early before the long lines form at the public conduits. Behind her, a young apprentice struggles to drag open the thick door of a bakery. A warm breath of fresh bread escapes into the cool air, and for a brief moment, the street smells almost pleasant. Almost. As the sun begins to rise, the city gathers momentum. Paris at this time may hold close to 200,000 people within its walls, making it one of the largest cities in Europe. Students from distant lands come to study at the famous university. Merchants arrive from Italy, England, and the German states. Priests, laborers, nobles, craftsmen, beggars. Every corner of society moves through these streets, yet they all share the same crowded space. You turn toward the market district, following the growing noise ahead. Voices rise and overlap until the street becomes a current of sound. Wooden carts creak under the weight of goods. Iron tools clatter against stone. A donkey brays loudly somewhere near the butcher stalls. Then the smell returns, stronger now. The Cemetery of the Innocents lies just beside the marketplace, enclosed by a long stone wall. At first glance, it appears almost peaceful. Rows of simple graves stretch across the uneven ground, marked by wooden crosses weathered by rain. Along the edges stand covered galleries where bones from older graves are stacked neatly once space runs out below. Because space always runs out, the cemetery has served Paris for centuries, and the dead arrive faster than the soil can claim them. When new pits are dug, workers sometimes uncover layers of bodies only partially decomposed. The ground shifts beneath their shovels. Bones break through the surface, and a smell impossible to ignore drifts steadily into the surrounding streets. You might expect people to avoid such a place. Instead, they gather beside it every day. Market stalls line the outer walls of the cemetery where the crowds are thickest. Merchants shout over one another while displaying cuts of beef, salted fish, baskets of onions, and rough loaves of bread still warm from the ovens. A fishmonger slams a knife through the spine of a large carp while flies buzz impatiently around the exposed flesh. Life and death stand only a few steps apart. What fascinates me about this moment in history is how ordinary it felt to the people living through it. They were not blind to the smell. They noticed the bones when graves were disturbed, yet the city was too crowded, too alive, to pause for discomfort. Work had to continue. Food had to be sold. Survival left little room for delicate sensibilities. Still, the presence of the dead was never completely ignored. Occasionally, the earth collapses slightly where graves have been packed too tightly. When that happens, fragments of bone sometimes roll free into the open air. A skull here, a femur there. Workers quietly gather them and carry them into the stone galleries that line the cemetery walls, stacking them beside thousands of others in careful rows. Children sometimes watch with quiet curiosity. A group of boys dart past the edge of the graveyard now, chasing one another through the market crowd. Their laughter cuts sharply through the heavier sounds of trade and labor. One of them slips in the mud and falls hard against the wooden frame of a stall. The butcher shouts in irritation, waving them away with a blood-stained cloth. Moments like this give the city a strange energy. Even beside the graves, life refuses to slow. But as the morning grows busier, other details begin to emerge. A priest moves slowly through the crowd, murmuring prayers as he passes the cemetery gate. Two men carry a wrapped body toward the entrance, their steps careful but unceremonious. Death is common here, too common to inspire much spectacle. And yet, something about the closeness of it all lingers in the mind. Imagine living each day beside a place where generations lie buried beneath thin layers of earth. Imagine buying bread while the ground beneath your feet holds the remains of thousands who once walked these same streets. It changes the way you see the city, because this is only the beginning of the story. As the sun climbs higher and the markets grow louder, Paris reveals parts of itself far less comfortable than the crowded graves beside the innocents. Before this day is finished, you will see how the filth of the streets, the weight of poverty, and the harsh justice of the medieval world shape the lives of everyone who calls this city home. By midday, the market becomes louder, hotter, and far more difficult to ignore. The narrow square beside the cemetery of the innocents fills with bodies pressing shoulder to shoulder. Merchants shout prices with hoarse voices, while buyers push forward to inspect bread, onions, salted fish, and cuts of meat hanging from iron hooks. Flies gather quickly wherever blood touches wood. A butcher's apprentice swats at them with a rag that only spreads the smell further through the air. The ground beneath the stalls is damp and dark, not only from spilled water and animal blood, but from centuries of burial just beyond the stone wall. Sometimes the soil shifts slightly when too many graves have been dug in the same place. When that happens, workers quietly shovel the loose earth back into place and continue their labor without drawing attention. No one wants the market to stop. Paris survives because trade continues. Bakers must sell bread. Carpenters must repair doors and carts. Students from the university wander through the crowds in dark robes, debating theology and philosophy while carefully lifting the hems of their garments away from the mud. A bell begins ringing somewhere deeper in the city. It echoes through the narrow streets in slow, measured tones. Church bells mark the rhythm of daily life here. They call people to prayer, announce funerals, and sometimes warn of danger. In a city this crowded, sound travels strangely. The bell rolls across rooftops and down into the tight alleys like a slow wave of metal. You follow the noise toward a wider street where another crowd has formed. This one is quieter. At the center stands a wooden platform built against the open space of the square. Two guards in chainmail hold long spears, while a small group of officials speaks with a priest beside them. A man kneels nearby with his hands bound in front of him. His clothing is torn and stained from the struggle that brought him here. Public punishment is not unusual in Paris. In fact, it is expected. Justice in the medieval city must be seen. A thief caught stealing bread, a pickpocket discovered in the market, a violent drunk who refused to obey the watch. These people are brought into the open so the rest of the city can witness what happens when order is broken. The kneeling man stares at the ground. Around him, the crowd murmurs quietly. Some people watch with curiosity, others with indifference. A few look away entirely. Punishments vary depending on the crime. Sometimes it is a whipping, sometimes the pillory, where the offender stands locked in wooden stocks while the public throws rotten food and insults. Today, the sentence is harsher. The executioner steps forward carrying a heavy sword. His work is a grim profession, but an essential one. Cities like Paris rely on clear displays of authority to keep thousands of restless people under control. The priest finishes his prayer. For a moment, the square becomes strangely still. Even the market noise fades slightly as attention shifts toward the platform. Then the sword rises, flashes briefly in the pale sunlight, and falls. The crowd exhales. Some spectators cross themselves quickly before returning to their errands. Others linger only long enough to confirm the sentence has been carried out. Death, like the cemetery beside the market, is part of the city's daily rhythm. What strikes me most when imagining these scenes is how little time people had to dwell on them. Life in medieval Paris was demanding. Food had to be earned each day. Tools had to be repaired. Rent had to be paid to landlords who owned the timber houses crowding the streets, so the market continues. By late afternoon, the sunlight slants between the tall buildings, casting long shadows across the mud. The crowds thin slightly as merchants begin counting coins and packing unsold goods back into carts. The smell of smoke thickens again as cooking fires are lit inside homes and taverns. Paris does not grow quieter as evening approaches. In some ways, it becomes louder. You pass a narrow tavern where laughter spills through the doorway, along with the sour smell of cheap wine. Laborers sit at heavy wooden tables drinking from clay cups after a long day of work. Their hands are rough from hauling timber, hammering iron, lifting stones for new construction along the city walls. A musician plucks a simple melody from a worn lute in the corner. The tune wavers slightly, but the rhythm is enough to bring a few tired smiles. Outside, the streets grow darker. Medieval cities have no public lighting. Once the sun disappears, shadows take control of the narrow lanes between houses. Travelers carry small lanterns or torches, but many simply move carefully through the darkness they know so well. This is when Paris changes. The market stalls close, but other parts of the city wake up. Gamblers gather in hidden corners. Thieves watch for distracted merchants walking home with the day's earnings. The city watch patrols slowly with spears and lanterns, calling out the hour to remind everyone that order still exists after dark. Yet danger lingers. A shout echoes suddenly from a nearby alley. Two men stumble into the street, struggling over a small leather purse. One lands a desperate punch before the other bolts into the shadows, vanishing between the leaning walls of timber houses. No one chases him. People simply step aside and continue walking. In a city this crowded, survival often means minding your own business. Eventually, the streets empty. Smoke drifts upward from chimneys, while doors close and wooden shutters are secured against the night air. Inside the small houses, families gather around hearth fires that flicker weakly against blackened stone. You return to the narrow room where the day began. The straw mattress waits in the corner. The smell of smoke and damp wool hangs in the air exactly as before. Outside, the distant bell of a church rings again to mark the passing hour. Somewhere beyond the walls of the house, the cemetery of the innocents rests beneath the darkness. Beneath its soil lie centuries of Parisians who once woke to the same sounds, walked the same muddy streets, and breathed the same uneasy air. When I think about that city, what stays with me is not simply the filth or the danger. It is the strange resilience of the people who lived there. They woke each morning beside the dead, worked all day in crowded streets thick with noise and smoke, and still found ways to laugh in taverns before returning home. Paris in the year 1400 was not comfortable. It was loud, dirty, unpredictable, and often brutal. Yet, it was also alive. And that may be the most important truth history can offer us. The past was not inhabited by distant figures moving through faded paintings. It was lived by ordinary people who endured difficult worlds with remarkable persistence. They woke, worked, feared, celebrated, and slept beneath the same uncertain sky. And somehow, through all of that struggle, the city continued to breathe.